The opinions you hear on Your Mountain from individual hosts or guests do not necessarily represent those of Your Mountain, our sponsors, or other entities we're affiliated with professionally or otherwise.
There are millions of acres of opportunity out there. They belong to you. Every day, decisions are being made that affect your land, your water, your wildlife. You should know about them. This is Your Mountain.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back for another episode of the Your Mountain podcast. I'm your host, David Wilms, sitting in my sunroom in sunny Cheyenne, Wyoming, and I'm looking at my computer screen at our co-host, Nephi Cole.
What's up, Dave?
Nephi,
what a wonderful day, isn't it?
It's one of my favorite days of the year, quite honestly.
It is a wonderful day. Or maybe it's not a wonderful day. I mean, that's really the question of the day, is whether or not it's a good day or not.
It is, and we'll say why in a second. I got to give a shout out to Mike McGrady. Oh wait, Mike's not here.
Oh yeah.
So
he's texting us though right now. He's very interested in the subject of our conversation today.
Yeah,
much so that he's checking in.
I'm glad he's checking in because we have had a volunteer, one of our regular guests and big listeners, Chris Tymason, has volunteered to take over as a co-host of the show if Mike never comes back. So the fact that he's willing to text today maybe buys him another week before we have to start taking open auditions for the third host of the podcast.
Does Mike know that Chris wants to replace him, or is this news to Mike?
Oh, Mike knows.
Oh, does he?
Yeah, I think Chris sent a text to everybody as like, if you know, I'm openly auditioning here. I think you were on it even, Nephi.
He says in the text, so we're talking about it, Mike says that Chris can buy him out. So Chris, there apparently is an opportunity for you, but it's going to cost you.
And his share in the company is pretty sizable. The cost of buying out that share is going to be pretty exorbitant.
Yeah, if you guys, it's this starting a podcast thing. This isn't easy.
It's even, it's not.
It's not as if you can just buy some janky microphones and a Libsyn subscription and
just plug in and go.
Yeah, sit around your house with like a harmonica and like make your own intro music. It's not like you can do that. I mean, we did that, but you probably can't.
Well, anyway, we hope that, for everybody that doesn't know, Mike's transitioned into a new job, and it's because of his transition. It takes a lot of time to settle in and figure out what his schedule is and how it works. And we're excited for him to get comfortable and settled in there and back to providing us 2 or 3 sentences of commentary in every episode.
Yeah, it's going to be weird that he's not at the AG's office anymore. So he's a deputy attorney general up there and, making the wheels turn. But now, are we allowed,
no,
he's not
we
here.
Can't say. Yeah, but he'll get mad at us. He probably won't even listen. He won't know. We can throw him under the bus for an hour. He won't know.
He does something else very important now. So for a private firm rather than a government. But I will say this. So the Great American Outdoors Act was moved out of the Senate yesterday to the House.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that was our last week's episode. We were talking about the Great American Outdoors Act and saying how, perhaps when the episode hit that it may have passed the Senate. Episode dropped and it actually took an extra day. So it passed the Senate yesterday, 73-25. And it's on to the House now. Prospects are pretty good that it'll pass the House. This is, obviously listen to last week's episode about the whole act, but this is a big deal.
So here's my beef. Here's my beef for today.
Okay.
Getting on, I should just not be on Facebook, but I am. But getting on social media and having people hammer on the people that did not vote for it. Not just say, hey, thank you to the 75 who voted for, because let's talk about the right way to do this so everybody knows. The right way to do this is when you get what you wanted, when you get the bill that you wanted passed, you say thank you in a very nice way to all the people who passed the bill. You don't then go take handfuls of tomatoes and throw them at the people who didn't vote the way that you wanted. Primarily because you probably don't know why they voted, the way that they voted. For example, Senator Enzi in Wyoming.
Yeah, so, we talked about this last week too.
Yeah, it's just to see people who don't understand why, for philosophical reasons, people take different positions. The bill passed. Enjoy it. Say thanks. Celebrate it. It doesn't do you any good for the future of your legislation, the future of your issues, to have sour grapes and then to yell at people who didn't vote the way that you wanted. Negative feedback doesn't work. Positive feedback, like when they see that like you're willing to like be friends, like that's helpful. But too often, I mean, I know for a fact when you're grumpy with people because they didn't vote the way you wanted, that doesn't make them want to vote the way that you wanted next time.
Look, and there are other things to think about too. I mean, you're spot on, Nephi, and you mentioned Senator Enzi, and I think it's probably worth. I would actually mention it, or I'll let you mention it, and then I'll spin off of that kind of some thoughts I have on how you handle this the right way. But look at somebody like a Senator Enzi, who from Wyoming, and he's not dissimilar from many other Republican senators as well that voted no on this particular bill. They actually support the Land and Water Conservation Fund.
They actually
Many of these senators voted to permanently reauthorize the Land and Water Conservation Fund. It's not like they're opposed to the program.
It was 92-8, the reauth.
Right. So it's not like that these senators oppose the Land and Water Conservation Fund and the purposes for which it was set up. They have, for Senator Enzi, for example, he's a fiscal hawk, and he wants to treat the federal budget a lot like you would treat your family budget, which is you don't want to saddle your kids with your debt, right? And so his thought is, he's uncomfortable, and go back and we actually had a podcast with Senator Enzi, and he talked about this. He's uncomfortable with permanent funding when you don't necessarily have a permanent funding source. Like, how are you going to pay for something forever? And that's not I am not unsympathetic to that kind of argument. The other piece of this is you have the Land and Water Conservation Fund. You also had the deferred maintenance piece, and there were critics of the deferred maintenance piece for national parks and other federal public lands saying, this is a Band-Aid. It's providing a bunch of money to help address some of the deferred maintenance needs, but it's not addressing the overall, more systemic long-term funding issues or prioritization or management issues within the parks. And actually, Senator Enzi proposed an amendment to try and address that, which would have, I believe it was to raise park admission fees or entrance fees to say, if you're going to use it, you should pay for it. People should pay enough for that use to cover the costs, the expenses. The argument I was going to make, and then I'll kick it to you, Nephi, the argument I was going to make is instead of throwing these senators under the bus, instead of saying, it was wrong of you not to support this, think about what they were saying. This was a Band-Aid. It doesn't address the underlying problem. I support our national parks. We need to do this right. And say, okay, this bill probably will become law. And on the parks piece, that means we'll have a 5-year window where there's funding coming in for deferred maintenance to try and fix the overall problem. And say, reach out to those senators and say, we want to help you fix this problem permanently, like long term. Yep. Like, how do we address this over the long haul? Rather than throwing stones, look at it as an opportunity to take that next step and see if you can't fix something over the long term.
Yep. Well, I think that the disappointing thing for me is, one of the conversations that I chimed in on and saw, there's an individual who I respect and whose organization I really respect and care about, who said, when you look at how these senators voted, and he was fairly abrasive about it, and then just said, Cory Booker does more for hunters than these 25 Republicans. To which you're like, you really have to just say, like, really, bro? That's really where you're gonna go.
I had to pull my jaw up off the ground and put my eyes back in my skull.
I saw you do Dave covered his mouth and then put his hands over his eyes, and I was like wondering, like, and I'm watching this on Zoom meeting. I'm like, what are you saying? What did I do? What's my face look like?
Nothing. It had nothing to do with you, Nephi. It was completely the Senator Booker comment doing more. And I'm thinking, I've seen a bunch of Senator Booker comments.
It's like, come on, guys,
about hunting, and I know that that's not necessarily a true statement.
And that's the challenge that we all need to lean forward towards. And without giving away the surprise of our 100th episode, which is upcoming and who's on there, this really captures exactly one of the main, issues that he talked about, which is this, we can't let people like label somebody as D and R and have that be enough and good enough and what decides, whether somebody's a good guy or a bad guy. What we have to do, we have to talk to our elected officials and say, it does not matter what party you are, D or R. I refuse to choose between two things that are very important to me, that are important to all of us. You need to get on board with my priorities, not me get on board with your party's priorities. You need to get on board with my priorities because I am your constituent. I am the person who votes for you. My neighbors are the people that vote for you. We live here. We don't live in Washington, D.C. You need to vote how we need you to vote, not how somebody who's up there, hanging out with you in D.C. wants you to vote, or somebody who is, managing a national party wants you to vote. Vote what's good for us. If we demand that, we can take politics in this country back. But it has to start there. It has to start with caring about your neighbors, looking at what is good, what's a consensus good things for you and your community, and then asking your representatives to honestly vote for those things, not for things because of the label or because of who is on board with it or whatever. And that's a challenge that we need to overcome to fix politics in this country. And then I'll get off of my soapbox now.
No, I think that what you've just done is you've teed up episode 100 perfectly. Episode 100, we've already recorded it. We know what's there. It's going to be a super cool conversation. And, we're not going to spring the guest on you yet. We're not going to tell you who it is, but it's who everybody should listen. I mean, the message there should resonate with everybody about how politics should run in this country and how we'd all be better off if politics.
And then vote for him.
This way.
Vote for him. Vote for him.
Oh, you just gave away that it's a him.
Nope, I did.
Okay. Today is a big day. A big, big day. Today, if this were the NFL, if this were the National Football League, today is the draft.
Yes, it is.
Right? Today is, and I've done this analogy before. I think we've taken, as hunters, we've managed to extend hunting to a year-round thing. Even if we're not hunting year-round, it becomes year-round because you have days like today, where, like I say in NFL terms, it's the draft. In real terms, it's the draw.
Yeah. Imagine how much more exciting it is for me year round because of all the gear I buy too. See, like for me, it's like literally like every day I can be planning a piece of gear that I'm going to buy to add to my kit for the, 5 days that I might use it during the year. You should really buy more stuff, Dave.
We've been over this a lot. And I probably won't because I like being cheap and I like having to work my butt off and having good stories to tell from being miserable in pretty bad gear.
You do love the mystique of being the cheap guy.
I'm all right with it. It's been with me my whole life. Why mess that up, right? Why change that? But I hunt. You and I both hunt a lot. I maybe hunt to an unhealthy level.
Mm-hmm. And I probably shop for gear to an unhealthy level, to be fair.
Sure.
Yeah.
right now I've started into my training regimen for this fall, and today, the draft, we're going to be,
is it sitting in your bathtub in a pair of cotton, like sweat, like a sweatsuit?
No,
like in cold water.
I should do that. No, my training is actually throwing on weight on my back and climbing mountains, summiting a bunch of peaks just because, I want to get the legs strong for being able to pack out animals in the fall. And it's one of the things I really believe in. You can't, if you're going to pack out an elk in October, you can't start training for it in September.
No, I agree.
You got to start training for it 6 months early. And so I've started doing that. But a day like today where the draw results come out, or find out where we get a hunt, what we get a hunt, that gives me that extra boost of motivation. And so I know I'm going to be sore tomorrow, because we're going to get these draw results, and it's going to motivate me to go.
Or is it because you're just going to whack your head on the table repeatedly, like bam?
Because I didn't get what? Yeah,
bam, yeah.
I'm going to be unconscious. I'm going to bludgeon myself from not drawing anything.
Well, you're all going to
hear. Everybody's going to hear it because we're going to do it while we're recording. We're going to find out what our results. We're going to find out what we're doing this fall.
I mean, it's not live to you guys, but it's live to us.
Live to us, yeah.
Yeah, and the fun part about it is, unlike most years, I have put in for the same elk area as you.
So mad at you. And what's going to happen? Are we going to predict this right? What's going to happen? You're going to draw this thing and I'm not.
Oh, boy.
Because that's been my experience in the past. First time applicants in this unit always seem to draw, and then I assume that it costs me. I even had it so bad once, and I don't want to give away the areas, but I had it so bad once that one year, I actually, and you maybe remember this because we were both in the governor's office at the time, I drew the tag and I was super excited.
I do remember
and then I found out that there'd been an error in the drawing system, and they had overdrawn, and they called me and took it back. I was so mad.
Yeah. That was a great year.
That was the worst.
Yeah. Well, this year, so I put in with a buddy who spent 22 years at the highest level fighting for our country overseas, because I figured I needed some good karma, right? Because who's not going to give that guy a tag? I mean,
I always assume that'll probably help you. I always assume that if you apply with a kid on your party application, that there's like it goes into a special box, and they're like, oh, a kid's on that tag. Everybody's drawing from that group.
Yeah. And, did you have a child in your group this time?
I actually have a child that's old enough, and she would not apply.
Boy,
she did not want to hunt. She did not want to hunt. But I agree. I should have just put her in anyway, and she could have eaten the tag.
Yeah.
This is going to cost me. We'll find out in 5-6 minutes. Until then, we actually want to talk about some substance today too.
Let's do it.
All right. So as we mentioned in the last podcast, we were talking about the Great American Outdoors Act, and we'd actually planned on talking about that and a bunch of cases going on, litigation going on around that involve grizzly bears and the Endangered Species Act. So we want to revisit that. We want to touch that this week. And then we're going to tee up what one of our future topics will be as well. And maybe since we only have a few minutes before the draw, I'll tease our future topic first. Then we'll do our draw result, and then we'll talk bears. How does that sound?
Okay.
All right.
Are you still going to want to talk about anything after the draw results? Because it could be bad.
I know. We may just end this thing if it's that bad.
Okay, but look, let's tease the next one.
But all right, so here's the teaser. Look, I know, Nephi, you're the same way, and probably a lot of the listeners the same way. You consume your information from a lot of different places. And, I like to read a lot of different news sources. I don't buy into this idea. I hate the hashtag fake news. I personally hate that, because I know a lot of journalists that are really, they are doing their best to get the story and to try and represent it in the fairest way possible. And it is a hard job when you have, 40 seconds to do a TV spot, or you have 500 words to do a newspaper article, and you have to pick out the nuances and get it in a way, present it in a way that's not biased. So I have a ton of respect for what they do and what they're trying to do. And they're generalists. They're not subject matter experts. But because of that, I also recognize that not every news report you see is going to be accurate. It's going to be as accurate as it can get it, but it's going to miss.
There are some good journalists who are doing a really good job and trying very hard to be journalists. There are. We would be inaccurate if we didn't say that there are also individuals in that community who could up their game.
Sure. And then there are also issues that are completely outside of the wheelhouse of most journalists, and they don't take it on. And when they do, it's very difficult for them to do on the deadlines. And sometimes
they don't do research.
Sometimes they miss the mark. And what I've found is there was a decision that happened, and this has gone on over the course of a couple of years. And like I said, this is just a teaser, and we'll do a real deep dive in this in a future episode. But recently, the Trump administration announced that it was going to change some restrictions on hunting on wildlife preserves in Alaska, and allow. Let me put it this way: in 2015, the Obama administration put in place some hunting restrictions or types of hunting, methods of hunting restrictions on certain preserves in Alaska. This proposed through regulation, and this regulation is going to roll some of that back. And I read a bunch of news articles on this from a host of different sources, and they all seem to generally miss the mark on what was actually happening there. The stories were really hyperbolic, right? The story and sensationalistic. They were all talking about, well, this rollback is going to allow for the killing of bear cubs in dens and wolf cubs in dens. And, you would read through it and think, oh my gosh, what is the administration allowing? They're allowing this basically assault on wildlife on these preserves in Alaska. And it couldn't be farther from the truth. I mean, really what the proposal is set up to do. And like I said, we'll do a deep dive in the history of all this, but generally speaking, what it's set up to do is make hunting on these preserves, which is a permissible activity in a lot of places, right? Make hunting on these preserves consistent with or subject to, I guess is the way to put it, state law. So whatever the state laws are for hunting, the state would regulate hunting there. And I mean, that's basically what it does. It just says the states will be the ones with primacy over wildlife management within the state, including on these preserers. And that's a simple way
and a good idea, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's a very straightforward. I mean, I'm presenting the very simplistic view of this, but that's basically what it does. And so that's the teaser of there is a lot of misreporting out there on this particular subject, and I think we want to take the time to do an actual deep dive, and we'll go through the 2015 regulation. We'll go through what the change of that regulation looks like. We'll go through what state laws in Alaska allow and don't allow as far as hunting, and we'll do a pretty deep dive into that topic on a future podcast to try and correct the record out there and tell you what really is happening with this regulation change. And I see a smile on Nephi's face because the clock just ticked to the top of the hour for us.
And I have my results.
You already have your results?
Yep. I'm going to wait for you to get yours.
Okay. I'm getting mine right now.
Yeah.
I had the site pulled up and I just accidentally closed it out. Clicking on the draw results right now. No, I'm not. Everybody else is. I don't know if I can get in. Hang on.
Yeah.
This is killing me now. Click here for draw results. Here we go. You already have yours. You're looking at it and you have that smile on your face like, I drew that tag. Oh man. I'd be so mad. Did you draw that tag?
Well, everybody has good days and bad days.
Did you draw that tag?
Some people have more bad days and good days. Some people have more good days and bad days.
Here we go. Yes. No.
So, Dave, how's your day?
No.
Let's
Are
talk,
you
talk about this.
Are you kidding me?
Let's talk about
Oh
this.
my gosh.
Hey, Dave,
This
where are you
is-
hunting this year?
General Elk.
So am I.
Are you?
Yeah. I like looked through there and I like the first thing I did the same thing you did. I read Resident Elk Successful. I'm like, yeah. And then I looked over and it said General, which is my second choice. And I was like, gosh damn it.
Yeah. So here's what I drew without giving you areas. General Elk. Let's see. I have a second elk tag, but it was my second choice cow calf. I couldn't even draw my first choice cow tag.
Uh-huh.
So I have a second choice cow tag, which that's fine. I'll just buy another one in that unit. So I'll end up with 3 elk licenses there.
Mm-hmm.
And then I did not draw for deer either. So I have a general deer tag.
Did you draw antelope?
I did. That is the one draw I got. I drew my
You-
antelope tag and I drew 2 Dauphin antelope
Well,
tags.
you did one better than me because I did exactly the same as you up until I did not draw. I had kind of a tough antelope area. I did not draw that antelope area that I wanted, but I did draw the same thing. I had a cow tag for a given area that I wanted to hunt as well. So I'll be hunting general elk for bulls. I'll be hunting a cow calf elk, additional cow calf elk. I will probably also tack on another cow tag because I want to. So the First Lady of Wyoming is doing this really cool initiative called
Right.
Food from the Field.
Yeah. Well, we talked about this once before.
Yeah, but if
On
anybody
this
doesn't know about
podcast.
it,
Yeah.
you can
No,
Google
talk
it.
about it again because you and I are both doing the same thing here.
Yeah, so you can Google it now, and she's got some information up on it on Game and Fish, and there's a really, really neat video that you can watch about it. And basically, what it is hunters that can donate, produce of whatever you want to call it. Like they can donate game that they take to people who are needy in the state of Wyoming. And the cool thing that she did with it was she also got 2 commissioners to donate commissioners tags. Then they raffled those tags for the money to actually pay for processing, to help pay for processing for folks who aren't able to do that, so they can do that correctly. And so what we're doing, just like you, I'm actually putting together a group, and we're going to, in addition to trying to fill our own freezers, we're going to be trying to fill some other people's freezers as well. And so I plan to do that with cow elk, and I also am looking forward to in fact, I think you're coming with me.
If you're talking the deer hunt,
Yep.
the whitetail,
Yeah, but an individual in a part of the state who has needs to cull because of the population's so large where he's at, needs to cull a whole bunch of does from his whitetails. And so we're going to take a bunch of guys down there, and we are going to go and do a charity hunt, if you will, and get some for us and then some for some people who maybe can't go get it for themselves. It's going to be cool.
Yep. So we're going to do the same thing. I usually don't get this many licenses, but
That's
I am
a
this
lie.
year.
You usually get everything that you think you have time to go hunt, you get.
It's true. I don't usually get the
But just
additional.
this year, you have an excuse to spend more time hunting.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
what's really going on here.
Well, I don't usually get the additional Dauphin antelope tags. I usually only do 1 antelope, but I got the 2 extra antelopes, so we'll do 3 antelope this year. And my intent is to keep 1 for myself and donate 2 of them to the program, the First Ladies program.
Let's tell Mike that he didn't get his tag.
Yeah, Mike.
No
Poor
tag
Mike.
for you, says Nephi.
You know what they should do? This is my
give
one
me the
critique of
tag?
the. No, here's my critique of the draw
okay.
system. They should put what you drew, like instead of saying successful first, they should put the tag you got first.
Yeah.
They either say unsuccessful if you didn't get anything at all, or frankly, they should say unsuccessful for your first choice. If you didn't get that, you just need to know. Cause I got my heart rate up and my excitement up when I saw successful.
Mm-hmm.
And then I look below it and I'm like, wait, general. Oh no, I didn't draw my tag.
Well, I'm sorry, Dave.
Well, it's like the draft. It's like the NFL draft. You always want that first round pick. You want that best tag you can possibly get. But Tom Brady was a 6th round pick and he did all right.
So
my general tag, I'm going to do just fine.
What's really funny is like, as we're sitting here griping, right? We're sitting
about having 3 elk tags.
Yeah, because we have 3 elk tags. I'm like, well, I guess I'm going to have to hunt mule deer and then 7 whitetails in some place I didn't exactly want to in the same state. That's like,
I have to go to my second choice area in the same state. I'm going to have to drive
another half hour. What a bunch of crap.
Yeah, we're spoiled. Yeah. Sometimes we have to pinch ourselves and realize that. Like a general elk license in Wyoming is,
it's 50% of the state, fully.
Yeah, 50, and the fact that you can walk up and buy licenses over the counter and hunt in 50% of the state with a pretty high success rate, that's pretty remarkable.
Well, interesting. I almost always hunt general, and the reason I almost always hunt general is because typically I hunt from guys without a state, this is really going to mess me up for next year. Because Wyoming, for people that don't know, Wyoming residents for elk and deer can't buy preference points. We don't have preference points. It's always luck of the draw, basically. And it's just odds of the areas, your likelihood of getting in. Whereas if you've got a friend coming from out of state who's got a few preference points, they're going to put in for a given area also, but they're going to know before you. And typically 1 or 2 preference points in Wyoming is going to get you a general bull elk tag in Wyoming. So if you've got a buddy from Tennessee who wants to come hunt elk, chances are he can come to Wyoming every 2nd or 3rd year. He can come here and hunt elk on a general tag. So if you like to hunt with that person, you're going to wait, you're just going to buy a general tag. And so that's typically what I do. Well, this year, everybody nobody drew. I knew that already. And so the guys that typically I come hunt with, we're all they're going to come hunt deer and stuff, but they're not going to hunt elk. And so that's where we ended up being like, hey, I'm going to put in for a really good area that I've always wanted to hunt, but I, don't want to hunt.
The area where I've killed the biggest bull of my life. Yeah.
Yeah. Dave's area.
Yeah.
And if I get it, imagine the glee. Like I was just like, it was almost better for me. I didn't even if I didn't get it, I was like, oh, it just made me happy. Just knowing that you were just riled up because there was, that many more people in your draw pool. Like there's like 2 more guys might get to draw and you wouldn't. It made me.
It did. And it turns out neither one of us did. But you know what? I didn't draw this tag last year, and I shot a 6-point bull elk last year. They're good elk on general tags, and I saw tons of elk last year hunting a general unit. So I'll get over it in a hurry. In fact, I'm already over it.
I get on a good bull every year in a general area.
I'm actually really excited I drew this antelope tag because it's a unit that I love to hunt, and I've now drawn it 2 years in a row. And before that, it had been like 6 years since I drew it. So the fact that I drew it 2 years in a row, I'm actually pretty psyched about that. And I'm just trying to talk myself up. And it's
not out in the place where you hunt sage grouse, is it?
It is.
Well, then that's really upsetting to me because that's the tag I put in for antelope just because I wanted to get it so you couldn't have it.
Well,
that's not true.
Work.
I just
I was like, it didn't work out. Didn't work out for you. Anyway, okay. So there's the draw. Now we can get back to the bears and have a good conversation about that. So what's going on in the world of grizzly bears and bears in general? I'm going to summarize. We're going to talk about. I think we can do this pretty quickly. There are at least 4 active cases right now going on that in some way, shape, or form involve grizzly bears. Only one of those cases is actually very specific to the grizzly bear delisting. And we've talked about this case before. So I'll just do a real quick summary on this, and then we're going to get into some interesting cases and maybe talk about why they're happening this way. And I know they'll be focused on specific parts of the country, but what's happening here could be applicable a lot of different places with other species. So here's the deal. All right, so we know grizzly bears were proposed for delisting in 2017, and immediately once that not just proposed, it was actually the people forget this part. It was actually the Obama administration that originally proposed, put out the draft rule to delist grizzly bears. It wasn't the Trump administration. It was the Obama administration. The rule was finalized during the Trump administration. But a lot of groups have latched on and said, oh, Trump's delisting bears. He hates, they're not recovered. It was actually the Obama administration that proposed the delisting of grizzly bears.
Yes. It's
right.
pretty much, there's a lot of things to say here. We're not saying that one administration is better than the other. We're just saying, like, this is a bipartisan issue. This isn't something that.
Yeah, that's the point.
Yeah.
This isn't political. This was biological.
Yes.
And the biologists said grizzly bears are recovered. And so they were proposed for delisting. The actual delisting rule was put in place under the Trump administration just because of the timing of how all that works. But it was just finalized. Immediately a lawsuit was filed, as you would expect. A lawsuit was filed in Montana. An injunction was put in place preventing that rule from going into effect. And then the judge in Montana decided against the Fish and Wildlife Service, meaning said that the Fish and Wildlife Service acted arbitrarily, did a couple of things incorrectly in the rulemaking process. And in fact, grizzly, because of that, the rule to delist was vacated and the listing rule was put back in place. And that decision was appealed to the Ninth Circuit. The Ninth Circuit held argument on that earlier this spring. The Ninth Circuit has not issued a decision on that, although we know
although you already know what it's going to be.
Yeah, I was going to say, although based on the arguments that were made and some of the questions that were asked during the arguments, there's a pretty good
just
sense.
Say Ninth Circuit, and then we'll all just nod our head. Oh yeah, I get it. Ninth Circuit again.
Let's just put it this way. Without going in, we're not going to go into the details of all the issues that were appealed and talking about the various issues that were appealed to the Ninth Circuit. But in order for the Fish and Wildlife Service to prevail and the states to prevail on this, they'd have to win every issue. Well, the United States chose not even to contend one of the issues. The state of Wyoming tried to make the argument for that issue instead. But it's very difficult if the agency writing the rule doesn't.
Like, wait a minute. I know that he said that what you said about him was true, but let me tell you why it's not.
Right. So it's very unlikely, very, very unlikely that the Ninth Circuit is going to come back and overturn the decision of the district court and reinstate the delisting rule. The more likely scenario is that rule will be upheld, at least in part, maybe in full. And then the Fish and Wildlife Service is going to have to issue a new delisting rule consistent with the decision, which will then result in another lawsuit, right?
I wonder where that one will happen at.
What do you mean? Where that lawsuit will happen?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's rhetorical, right?
Yes.
I mean, it's going right back to Montana.
Yes, it's the Ninth Circuit.
Yeah.
It's just.
So that's one case, but do know at the root of this case, the facts leading up to this case is you had biologists that were part of. I mean, they're career biologists in an agency. They're not part of an administration. They're career biologists within the Fish and Wildlife Service. But you have these career biologists that were then supported by the administration appointees from both administrations saying, yes, grizzly bears are biologically recovered and should be delisted. They've, at least in this greater Yellowstone area population.
Yeah. Can I tell a quick story?
Please do.
The story of sitting in Washington, D.C., next to Steve Bullock and next to Matt Mead. Was
that in Washington, D.C.? Because I was there with you.
It was in D.C. I think this was before you. I think this was a trip you were not there, I don't think.
Oh, okay. Okay.
But because it was with the Obama era Fish and Wildlife.
I was there for those guys. I was in the room. We were both. I think we were both in that room.
Sitting there, and Butch Otter was on the phone, and I think. It may have just been the three of them. So it's the governor of Idaho, and then watching Steve Bullock and Matt Mead alternately want to reach across the table and strangle people as they were working through this issue. But ultimately, everybody's saying like, yeah, we know that they shouldn't be listed anymore. We know they should be delisted. Like, that's just, I mean, it was so stark to me how we all know the truth. We all know where we're at. And again, here you have it, Democrat and Republican together on this issue, and the biologists agreeing with him in principle and being like, oh yeah, well, we pretty much agree with you. We just don't like, this, the way that this comma was written or whatever. Like, very frustrating.
Right. That's one example of frustration. And the next cases we're going to talk about, the reason I wanted to just mention that case on the actual delisting is really wanted to emphasize the point that virtually all of the bear biologists agreed that grizzly bears were recovered. And I mean, federal biologists, state biologists, and other biologists all agreed that this population was frankly sitting at about carrying capacity. I mean, it expanded its range. It's pushing into new ranges, increases in conflict with humans. I say all that to emphasize this point that this wasn't they didn't make a decision 1 year that they were recovered. They made this decision. We're in 2020. When a species is listed and a part of the effort to recover a species is put together a recovery plan. And in that recovery plan, you identify the metrics, different metrics that need to be met to have a recovered population into the foreseeable future, which is really the standard you have to meet, or a standard you have to meet. We can go into more detail. There's a lot more detail about what you have to meet for delisting. I'm oversimplifying this. Let me put it that way. But it's a standard you have to meet to delist, right? That standard was met in, I believe it was either 2001 or 2002. 19 years ago, grizzly bears had met the biologically identified recovery standards for this population. In 2007, they were delisted the first time before the Ninth Circuit reinstated that rule. So, and then again, a decade later, there have been multiple efforts trying to remove grizzly bears from the list of threatened and endangered species. And you have biologists dating back now, 19 years that have said, yep, we've hit the targets, we've hit the recovery objectives, and they're biologically recovered species, and they're still on the list. And the reason I set it up like this is to talk about these next cases.
Okay.
So
I just want to quickly point out that when you said that you're oversimplifying it, a whole lot of people just went, their heads exploded because it's so complex already.
You're like, that's
so
simple?
So go ahead.
Okay. Sorry. I guess when you do this every day or for a living for years and years, your definition of simplification changes.
Yeah.
So here's what's going on. This is my personal, we're going to get into personal opinion. We'll get into personal opinion a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to get into some opinion a little bit, and then we're going to talk about the cases, and we'll really lay out the facts of the cases and what's going on. But I have this theory. There are a number of organizations out there that file these lawsuits, and they use grizzly bears as the way to get in. Like, that's the way. But when you really read the cases, they're not filing these lawsuits to protect grizzly bears. They have some other purpose in mind, and grizzly bear is the vector for that purpose, right? And so it's actually using, in my opinion, it's the use of the Endangered Species Act, trying to use it as a tool to advance other agendas. And we'll talk about what that means here in a second.
And it's worth noting for everybody that this is not new. And what Dave's about to tell you about absolutely happens, and it happens with most of the environmental laws that were created about the same time as the Endangered Species Act. It is an attempt to look at the law as a tool for instituting some other management paradigm that you desire that has very little to do with the intent of why the law was made. And that happens every day. It's very common. Go ahead.
Yeah. And I should also be clear when we talk about this, there are dozens, probably hundreds of conservation groups in the United States. And the overwhelming majority of them don't use these tactics.
They're awesome.
They're awesome organizations looking to
intent.
do some great things for conservation. And they do it in a different way. And look, there is a time for every organization where litigation is probably an appropriate route to protect your interests. And so these groups, I will say, I mean, they're consistent. I mean, they have a very specific purpose and agenda, and they'll go about trying to achieve that agenda in a lot of different ways. And one of the ways is through litigation. And they've found creative ways to try and do that. I'm not going to attack their creativity. They've come up with creative ways, to try and do it. But it does create some conflict, with people. And I don't know that it's the long-term, the best way to build relationships and do good conservation.
No, it's a terrible idea. And so you're trying to be really nice, but let's just call it what it is. Like when the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And a variety of these organizations were built, and that's for these purposes. And the only thing that they know is operation, the way that they're operating now. So if you're a group that was built around, you like to do lawsuits, you continue to like to do lawsuits, and that's what you do. You hammer away on lawsuits. Well, that doesn't win you a lot of friends. And sometimes it not only doesn't win you a lot of friends, sometimes it's not even effective. Sometimes the only thing it's effective for is your fundraising. And there are organizations that started that way and then have successfully moved into something else. There are organizations that have started as, community, whatever you want to call it, just like rah-rah organizations that have moved into effective on-the-ground conservation organizations. And there are some organizations that have no desire to, that they're going to continue to, their main purpose is going to be to like roll out a headline and file a lawsuit.
Yep. So here's the first one. There's a lawsuit filed in Idaho. It was actually filed almost a year ago, June of 2019. And it's continuing along right now. But the lawsuit was filed against the U.S. Forest Service and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And what they are alleging is that they violated what's called Section 7 of the Endangered Species Act, which is really if you're going to do something that could potentially jeopardize an endangered species, you have to do what's called consult. You have to talk to each other, and you have to come up with a plan to not jeopardize the species, right? In this instance, so the challenge is that the Forest Service should have done this consultation because grizzly bears because grizzly bears could be put at risk. This is allegedly grizzly bears are put at risk because of the use of bait to hunt black bears in national forests in Idaho and Wyoming. That's the crux of the lawsuit. The theory is that if you allow baiting of black bears, you're going to have incidental losses of grizzly bears as a result of that. And the complaint of the lawsuit points out some examples of grizzly bears being killed over, black bear baiting sites, dating back, I don't even remember how many years, and over the course of a number of years. They provide specific examples. We're not talking about hundreds of bears here. They give maybe 10 examples in a decade of this happening. What they don't get into, and what I think will come out in the case, is how the states of Idaho and Wyoming actually handle baiting where there could be grizzly bears. And in fact, my recollection is that neither state allows baiting of black bears in the primary recovery areas of grizzly bears.
You are correct.
There are places where you might have outside of that area where there could be baiting allowed. I do know that in Wyoming, for example, the way a bait site works for black bears, is you have to, before the season begins, you have to identify where you're going to place your baits. You have to register that bait site with the Game and Fish Department with the coordinates on the ground of where that bait site is. You can't have more than one bait site per square mile, I think is what it is. Maybe I have that off, but I think I'm pretty close. And the kicker is, if there is evidence that a grizzly bear has visited a bait site, that bait site has to be shut down and it can't be used for the rest of the season. And what's interesting from my conversations with personnel at the Game and Fish Department is, with this increasing use of trail cams and cameras over bait sites, what they're finding is
they're shutting
down a lot of baits.
Yeah,
that grizzlies might hit, and by shutting them down, you're avoiding that incidental take.
Yeah.
Right?
So what people are ignoring is that there is a state mechanism that's already existing and works to basically deconflict and make sure that you're not accidentally shooting a grizzly bear that comes into a black bear bait, and that's existed for a long time and will continue to exist because guess what? States are pretty good at wildlife management. Right.
You know what's also interesting about this lawsuit, though, is some of the places that they allege there's risk to grizzly bears are places that there aren't grizzly bears right now. And they just happen to be places where these organizations want there to be grizzly bears. They think they'd be good places to have bears, and they don't want to have, they don't think there should be any black bear baiting. But really, at a fundamental level, this case actually has very little, when you really dive into it, it has very little to do with grizzly bears, because even in the complaint, it acknowledges that the amount of incidental take of grizzly bears as a result of black bear baiting is awfully low compared to other incidents of conflict with grizzly bears.
Yes.
This is a fundamental opposition to the use of bait for hunting black bears. And this is the path towards trying to shut down baiting of black bears.
Yeah. With the realization that the same groups that are pushing to keep you from baiting black bears would just assume you not hunt black bears, period.
Right. So the first step to getting to that point is, you take
make
what
it
they
about
would
the
view. Endangered
Endangered Species Act and say, hey, this is just about grizzly bears. When the reality is your goal is just you hate hunting. But let's make this about, it's just finding a bullet to put in your gun to take a shot at hunting.
Right. No, that's exactly right. And so what's the low-hanging fruit? Right. The low-hanging fruit is
the
baiting.
Endangered Species Act.
Well, I was going to say, obviously the Endangered Species Act for the mechanism, but what's the first thing you go after if you want to shut down black bear hunting? You start with baiting.
Yeah.
Because that's a more controversial method of take.
And in some
and
states,
they think it'll be easier to get support for banning baiting.
Yeah.
And so you start with, and some states, what you're probably about to say, some states already don't allow baiting.
That's
Many
right.
states don't allow
like
baiting.
Colorado.
Right. And so you can say it's not unprecedented to stop baiting. And if we can prevent, and then you try and show losses of a threatened species as a mechanism to stop baiting, to say, look, we're having this detrimental impact on a federally listed threatened species, and we could jeopardize its existence by continuing baiting. Then you're starting to run an effective public relations campaign to stop the practice of baiting as a hunting mechanism. And then, but then what's the next step? Once you stop the baiting, that's not where it ends for these groups, right? That's the first step because they view that as the easiest method to stop first. But then it's going to be, we take it to the next step and you stop spring hunting. Maybe we don't have any spring bear hunts anymore. They're coming out of their den. We should really be allowing them to, they might have new cubs with them. We don't want to risk losing cubs. It's just snowballs, and the ultimate end game is to end bear hunting. And then when that ends, what's next?
Yeah, it's to find the next reason why it's not nice to hunt something else.
Right. So that's my take on this. That's a really quick synopsis of this litigation. But that's kind of my take on this case is it really has, even though when you read the complaint, you'd think, oh, this has everything to do with grizzly bears. They talk about grizzly bears, 150 times or whatever it is. They mention grizzly bears. It's not really about grizzly bears. Grizzly bears is the the hook. It's the way to get in and attack something that they're concerned about. And if you might not believe me, you might think that's a tin hat theory, but I'm going to talk about this next case as well, and it kind of builds on it. All right. So these next two cases are related. So we'll just talk about both of them together. Really, so this one is, again, it's very Wyoming specific, but there are two lawsuits that have been filed in Washington, D.C. in challenging grazing in the Upper Green River grazing allotment of the national forest there. And I'm trying to remember, is that in the Shoshone National Forest?
I believe so.
I think that's where it is. Anyway, it's kind of where the Wind River range, Upper Wind River range.
Yeah, it's pre-Bridger Teton, but it's close.
Yeah, it's really close to it's right around the Bridger Teton.
So we're talking about like in that vicinity.
Correct. So here's the case that I want to talk about. Like I said, it's in the Upper Green, Wyoming. And it's challenging the grazing allotment, the ability to for ranchers to graze up in the Upper Green, saying, so here's how it works. There's a grazing allotment, and they have to get a permit from the U.S. Forest Service to graze up there. It's a pretty high conflict area for grizzly bears. There's a high grizzly bear density, but also because of the livestock up there tends to be conflict where grizzly bears are actually munching on these livestock. They're killing them and using them as a prey source. And as a result of that, there are grizzly bears that are killed and removed from that area.
Yes.
Because of the conflict, to try and reduce conflict. And that's been going on for decades. Well, the Forest Service granted a grazing permit, and it's a 10-year permit that would allow the killing of up to 72 grizzly bears over that 10-year period within that grazing allotment to reduce conflicts. Now, to be clear, I think up to this point, there've been a total of, if you were to do a 10-year running average, it'd be like 35 or 40 bears are killed. So the likelihood of killing 72 bears under this permit's pretty low. But that's the permit, and that permit was challenged.
So there's a stipulation on the permit basically saying that, like, as long as it doesn't go over this amount of mortality, we're okay with it. But if it does, then permit's out of there.
Right. Then we got a problem.
Yep.
Right. So that resulted in a lawsuit, in a couple of different lawsuits. And one of them was not unlike the lawsuit in Idaho, in that it was saying, you need to do a better job with your consultation, and 72 is, it's way more than this area can support, as far as bears. The other one was actually talked about grizzly bears, but it also, was saying, you violated the law because you didn't address what the grazing effect on not just federally protected grizzly bears, but this other endangered species, the Kendall Warm Springs dace, which is a small fish that's located in a single stream in that part of the state. And it's admittedly critically impaired. It's the only place on the planet, anywhere, that this species exists. And if the Kendall Warm Spring is impacted negatively, it could wipe out the entire species. But, that said, there are actually mitigation measures in place to prevent livestock from going into Kendall Warm Spring. Anyway, here's the deal. One of the groups that filed this lawsuit, one of their stated purposes, and this is where I say it's not always about the grizzly bear. One of their purposes is to end public land grazing.
This isn't by chance the group I think it is it?
Should we name groups?
Western Watersheds?
Yeah, it is.
Oh, yeah.
So
on their website, they used to have that their goal was to change, their fundamental goal was to change the way people eat meat. So go ahead.
Right. One of their goals, and it's very clearly stated, is to end public land grazing. It's now, am I saying that they don't advocate for grizzly bears and that they don't want to see a healthy grizzly bear population? No, they probably do there's probably some advocacy work around grizzly bears there. But if you can pull one of the largest remaining grazing allotments from that national forest, if you can remove it and have all that livestock removed from the national forest, it meets their underlying organizational goal of ending public land grazing.
Yeah.
And so if the mechanism for doing that is by saying you violated the Endangered Species Act by allowing too much grizzly bear mortality here, that's the means to the end.
And understand that they've done the exact same thing with the Clean Water Act. Mm-hmm. I mean, the exact same thing, which is they find a situation, and it goes as far as to their data has been thrown out several times where because of concerns over the quality of it, without saying manufactured as a word, but they've attempted to use another act, the Endangered Species Act, the Clean Water Act, to do the exact same thing. They wanted to get rid of public lands grazing is the real goal, but they're like, what tool do we have to attack it? Well, let's use the Clean Water Act. Oh, well, let's use the Endangered Species Act. Well, let's use NEPA. Well, let's use, and all these lawsuits, it really doesn't have anything to do with the animal or the specific spring. It has to do with the goal of, like, if we erode the edges of support for this activity, we could get rid of it. That's what the goal is.
And they may have, I'm not speaking to all the lawsuits they've ever filed. They may have other lawsuits that really are species specific or habitat specific. I'm just talking about this one in particular. And I'll give an example here. So in the Upper Green River, there is there's a cattle drive known as the Green River Drift. It's a 58-mile long cattle drive that landowners have been using for generations to move livestock from their winter pastures back up to the summer pastures on the national forest. And I say this because like I said, they've been doing this for generations. And during a time when grizzly bear numbers went from 137 in the greater Yellowstone area to well over 700 today, and it's probably actually more like 12 or 1300 in that area. And they've continued to do the same thing every year. It's such a cultural thing for that region that the Green River Drift is the only traditional cultural property that's associated with ranching that's on the National Register of Historic Places. This cattle drive is on the National Register of Historic Places. And yet, which means it's been used for a long, long time, yet grizzly bears have continued to survive and thrive. Now, are there conflicts there? Absolutely. It's one of the highest conflict areas in the greater Yellowstone area with bears and livestock. Would removing that livestock reduce the conflict? Absolutely, it would reduce conflict. Is it necessary to prevent jeopardizing the long-term survival of grizzly bears? Well, I think the history of how it's worked and how grizzly bear numbers have responded, even in the face of the fact that many have been removed, lethally or otherwise removed from that area because of conflict, speaks to the fact that it's not really putting the species in jeopardy, right? It's not putting that population in jeopardy. I shouldn't say the species, that population of the species in jeopardy.
Yeah, I think it's worth, Dave, bringing up the potential catastrophic or undesirable outcomes on both sides of this. You said, well, is it endangering, would removing livestock grazing, would that make it so there were no conflicts with bears? And the answer is yes. Would removing bears in their entirety make it so there's no conflict with livestock? The answer is also yes. That's not the right solution in either case. Now, there are proponents of both of those, of that same approach. And the thing for people to realize is either one of those outliers is a loser. And yeah, you could say we're going to remove one side of the argument entirely, and then then we don't have to deal with the argument. Then we don't have to deal with the challenge. That's not the way to do things. And I don't care if you like that's the way to do things. Let's get down to reality. We all share these lands. We all share these opportunities. We all make living doing different things. Some of them as ranchers, some of them as accountants, whatever. But there has to be this live and let live type of approach to all things in life. And if you can't make that happen, it's not going to work long term. And we should reject those outliers. It's very similar to these political issues we talked about previously. Like, the outliers don't work. That's not where real solutions are found. Real solutions are found in pragmatic solutions where you don't get everything that you wanted, but everybody can still sit on the same, around the same picnic basket and have a sandwich.
Well, and let me add on to that just a little bit, because there's let's think about the other consequences. Okay. So you pull livestock off and you think, okay, that's going to end conflict. Now grizzly bears are going to be free to roam. There won't be any of these conflicts. Well, what's going to happen when you pull livestock off? Well, there's a number of landowners that depend on that allotment to stay in operation. If you end livestock grazing there, what you're really saying is we're bankrupting these ranches, and instead we're going to subdivide and build condominiums and summer homes and cabins. And what's going to happen then? Instead of having a conflict with bears and livestock, it's going to be bears and
toddlers, your
dog or toddlers. I mean, and you're going to reduce critical winter range for big game animals. And so it's a lot more complicated than bears or people, bears or livestock. It's a lot more complicated dynamic to figure this out, what's going to work, because people are there, right? So then you say, okay, well, yeah, we pull livestock off and we don't allow people there. Well, that's not how property rights work in this country. So the point is, it's way more complicated. It's not a black and white issue here.
And I know you have another appointment, but I do want to say this for people to think about this and remember this. These states that people prize for hunting and outdoor recreation opportunity, like Wyoming, Idaho, Montana, they share one thing in common. They have the largest agricultural size per owner of any place in the nation. Why? Because they're ranches. And it's not because they're getting rich. It's because you have basically these individuals, these families who take care of this massive piece of land, but that creates massive opportunity for wildlife because it's uninterrupted. It's habitat that doesn't have houses every 50 feet. And so, these areas, honestly, they're critical for wildlife. Having these large, undivided properties that create habitat opportunities. So if you care about wildlife, you do not want to see, ranches are your friends. Ranchers are your friends. They're better than the alternative, which are recreational homes and small subdivisions.
Yep, that's exactly right. So where are we with this lawsuit right now? There are two different lawsuits. One of them, in fact, very recently, I think it was just last Friday, or about a week ago from when we're recording this anyway. Western Wasatch Project had filed a motion for a preliminary injunction with the judge saying, hey, you shouldn't allow any removal of grizzly bears and cattle herding in the upper Green River area. It's in the Bridger Teton, not the Shoshone, of the Bridger Teton National Forest, until this lawsuit's decided, and the judge denied that injunction, which signals, it doesn't tell you the outcome of the case, but it signals that maybe this isn't going to be the strongest case if the judge isn't willing to put an injunction in place here. If an injunction were put in place, it would say there's a pretty high likelihood of success on the merits for the plaintiffs here. And so we're going to put an injunction in place. So it calls into question, whether they'll be successful here. Anyway, that's going on. And the reason we talk about it, I know most of you aren't from Wyoming and most of you don't hunt in the upper Green, and most of you, maybe most of you aren't ranchers. But it's an example that we're pointing out of groups using the ESA as a tool to further other agendas that might not be ESA related. And that can apply anywhere in the country. And so we just bring this up as an example to say, hey, be on the lookout. If things aren't always exactly what people say they are, and maybe we're wrong about this. Maybe we've completely misinterpreted this. This is all about the grizzly bear. Except, like we said, biologists have said grizzly bears have been recovered for about 19 years. And we've been doing a lot of these practices, addressing these conflict issues during that entire time, and grizzly bear numbers have continued to expand and grow. We've been baiting bears. States have had, Wyoming and Idaho have had, black bear baiting regulations in place for decades on how black bear hunting is going to occur in and outside of grizzly bear occupied habitat. Yet we have this, and grizzly bears have continued to expand and grow. And so when you see those facts, you have to look at this through maybe a different lens. Is this really about the grizzly bear, or is it about something else? And is it about stopping public land grazing? Is it about stopping hunting? Is it about something else? And so we're just saying, hey, these types of things could happen in your part of the country too. And, use a critical eye on this. Keep your eye out. And if you see things like this happening, let us know, and we'll dive into it, and we'll highlight those in other parts of the country too. Cause I think it's worth having discussions about this, about, the appropriate ways to use the Endangered Species Act. Endangered Species Act should be used to recover threatened and endangered species. And as you'll hear from our 100th episode, if somebody finds an endangered species on their property, it should be something to be excited about, not scared of. And it's lawsuits like this that make people scared. Anyway, you have any more to chime in on, Nephi?
Well, just going to enjoy sharing maps with you about general elk hunt.
General elk hunting. Yeah, we'll do that. And hopefully this podcast isn't too choppy. For those that don't know, we actually have had to stop it a couple of times because I have a toddler that's just being a toddler. He's a three-nager right now. And, I've had to step out a couple of different times, and it's disrupted our flow a little bit. So I apologize. Thanks, Nephi, for bearing with me on that issue.
It's all good. He deserves to be frustrated with you. I often am.
I know you are.
We're like soul, like we share something.
And congratulations on your general draws.
Thank you very much. You as well.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Congratulations on your cow elk tag.
You too. Yeah. I'm not complaining. We're going to have each have 3 elk tags in our pocket, and I'll have 3 antelope tags in my pocket, and we'll have a bunch of deer tags in our pocket. We are blessed to live in this state to be able to complain about that.
With that, Dave, go buy a new rifle.
All right.
And we're ready.
All right. And with that, everybody else, just remember that life is about experiences. So go have one.